Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, where I look at the films that might have been important to those of us who are part of the MTV generation. The 80s kicked off with a bunch of sword and sorcery fantasy films that were largely, but by no means exclusively, geared towards male viewers. Then in the mid-80s, the studios began to realize that many elements of the fantasy genre are highly appealing to young female viewers, and along came a burst of fantasy films that expanded their scope to particularly attract that audience. In addition to Labyrinth, which I looked at several months ago, there was The Never-Ending Story, Legend, The Princess Bride, Willow, and today's pick, 1985's Ladyhawke. Ladyhawke was directed by Richard Donner, then known for 1978's Superman, who would go on to direct the Lethal Weapon films and produce many big hits of the 80s, including The Lost Boys. The script was written by Edward Kamara and Michael Thomas and Tom Mankiewicz from a story idea by Kamara. Because these mid-80s films were targeted towards young viewers, they contained elements designed to appeal to Gen Xers, such as popular young actors like Val Kilmer, Tom Cruise, and Matthew Broderick. They also featured MTV-appropriate music, like David Bowie's Labyrinth soundtrack, Tangerine Dream's Legend soundtrack, and Lamal's Never-Ending Story theme, which reached the top 10 on the Billboard charts. The music of Ladyhawke is the work of Andrew Powell and Alan Parsons of the Alan Parsons Project, known for Eye in the Sky and Don't Answer Me and other hits of the 70s and 80s. They provided Ladyhawke with a somewhat infamous score, which was pretty typical for a fantasy film in 1985, but seems wildly incongruous now. If you've never seen Ladyhawke and you watch it today, you'll probably find yourself thinking, wow, why does this film have this music? The film is set in medieval France, and yet there are heavy synths and a hefty dose of electric guitar. A clever young thief named Philippe Gaston, also known as the Mouse, escapes from a dungeon via a sewer just moments before his scheduled execution by hanging. Philippe is played by Matthew Broderick, whose career had steered onto a nice track a couple years earlier with War Games, but who is still a year away from his star turn in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Throughout the film, Broderick will do that thing that American actors in fantasy films sometimes do, where he adopts an accent that is vaguely yet not specifically English, even though the film is not set in England. I don't know why actors do that, but Broderick is certainly not the only offender. Looking at you, Frodo. Philippe, who is a chronic liar as well as a thief, but who would like to mend his wicked ways, also carries on a running one-sided conversation with God throughout the film, which is a bold screenwriting choice. Upon learning of Philippe's escape, Captain Marquet, played by Ken Hutchinson, is ordered by the evil Bishop of Aquila, played by Matthew Broderick's War Games co-star John Wood, to hunt him down. Marquet and the members of his guard ride out in pursuit of Philippe. Philippe, who has obviously just stepped out of a barbershop located in 1985, travels to a tavern where he brashly boasts that he escaped from the dungeons of Aquila. Alas for Philippe, Marquet and his guards are having a drink at that very tavern. Philippe, who is extremely nimble, tries his best to evade them, but is captured. A moody and mysterious stranger, dressed from head to toe in all black except for a showy red-lined cloak, shows up armed with a crossbow and a very loyal hawk and saves Philippe's life. The stranger is Etienne Navarre, played by Rutger Hauer, who we have, of course, seen in Blade Runner. After rescuing Philippe, Navarre takes on Marquet, with whom he seems to have a long and acrimonious history. After defeating Marquet, Navarre gallops off, stopping only to kidnap Philippe and sling him over his saddle. They stop at a crude shack in the woods and ask an impoverished farmer and his wife for lodging. As night falls, Navarre sends Philippe out to gather firewood. Philippe, who is strangely unquestioning as to why Navarre has kidnapped him, considers running off but finds himself stalked by a fierce black wolf. When he returns to the shack, the farmer attacks him with an axe, intending to kill and rob him. The wolf emerges from the woods and kills the farmer. With Navarre nowhere in sight, Philippe tries to kill the wolf with Navarre's crossbow, but is stopped by a beautiful woman dressed in Navarre's cloak, who seems to appear out of nowhere. The woman assures Philippe he's only dreaming, then approaches the wolf, who seems friendly toward her. The mysterious woman is played by Michelle Pfeiffer, whose acclaimed performance in 1983's Scarface had established her reputation as a serious actress after an early career appearing in fluff like Grease 2 and the sitcom Delta House. In the morning, Philippe, Navarre, and the Hawk continue on their journey. They're headed to Aquila because Navarre is on a quest to kill the evil bishop. He needs Philippe to guide him into the city via the same route by which he escaped and to smuggle him into the bishop's cathedral. Back in Aquila, Marquet tells the bishop about his encounter with Navarre. The bishop wants Navarre killed, but is insistent that Navarre's hawk not be harmed. That night, Navarre ties Philippe to a tree so he can't run off while he goes off on his own. The mysterious woman appears again, and Philippe sweet-talks her into untying him, whereupon he promptly runs off. In the morning, Philippe is captured by members of Marquet's guards, who interrogate him as to Navarre's whereabouts. Navarre arrives and rescues Philippe, but during his skirmish with the guards, the hawk is shot with a crossbow bolt. Navarre orders Philippe to take the wounded hawk to a ruined castle occupied by a monk named Imperius, who might be able to heal it. Imperius is played by Australian actor Leo McKern, known for playing the title role in the British TV series Rumpole of the Bailey. I'll always love him for playing the cult leader Clang in the Beatles' gloriously stupid film Help. Imperius, who lives in drunken squalor, recognizes the hawk immediately. While Imperius gathers healing herbs, Philippe visits the wounded hawk, only to discover it has turned into the beautiful woman, who now has a crossbow bolt in her shoulder. According to Imperius, the woman is a noblewoman named Isabeau. Several years ago, the bishop fell in love with her, but she was already in love with Navarre, who at that time was the captain of the bishop's guard. Imperius confesses to Philippe that he drunkenly told the bishop about Navarre and Isabeau's secret romance. The bishop summoned the dark powers of hell to curse the lovers. Isabeau became a hawk by day and a woman by night, and Navarre became a man by day and a wolf by night. In this way, they could never again meet in the flesh. The bishop consults with a fearsome wolf hunter named César. César is played by prolific film actor Alfred Molina, then best known for Raiders of the Lost Ark. On the orders of the bishop, César has been trapping as many wolves as he can across the country in the hopes of killing Navarre. The bishop advises him to look for Isabeau because Navarre will never be far behind. The bishop's guards storm Imperius's castle. While Imperius distracts them, Philippe hustles an injured Isabeau to safety. Isabeau ends up dangling from the parapet, clinging to Philippe for dear life. His strength gives out, and she plummets to the ground just as the sun rises. Just in time, she transforms into a hawk and flies to safety. Navarre, in his human form, arrives and saves Philippe from the guards. Imperius insists to Navarre that there's a rare opportunity to break the curse. In 3 days, there will be an eclipse. As it will be both night and day at the same time, Isabeau and Navarre will both appear in human form for the duration of the eclipse. If they confront the bishop at that moment, the curse will be broken. Navarre thinks this is all just drunken nonsense, so he continues on with his plan to kill the bishop. Philippe, Navarre, and the hawk head to Aquila. At nightfall, after Navarre has turned into the wolf, Philippe and Isabeau encounter César, who is loaded down with freshly killed wolf carcasses. Realizing Navarre is in grave danger, Isabeau heads into the woods to protect him and ends up killing César by pushing him into one of his own wolf traps. Snow falls. Imperius catches up to Navarre and Philippe and urges Navarre to at least try to break the curse. Navarre refuses. At nightfall, Philippe tells Isabeau of the coming eclipse and the chance to rid herself of the curse. With Isabeau's cooperation, Philippe and Imperius try to capture Navarre in his wolf form. It goes horribly wrong, and the wolf falls into an icy lake. Philippe pulls him out, but loses Navarre's prized sword and is clawed by the wolf in the process. In the morning, Navarre lashes out at Philippe for losing his sword. He then feels pretty horrible when he realizes he badly wounded Philippe while Philippe was saving his life. At night, Imperius smuggles Isabeau and Navarre in his wolf form into the city, while Philippe sneaks in through the sewers. The day of the eclipse dawns, and the bishop holds mass while Philippe slips into the cathedral. Navarre heads off to kill the bishop. He orders Imperius to kill Isabeau in her hawk form if he fails at his quest, because it's too cruel to doom her to a half-life as a hawk without him. Dude, you really need to run that decision by Isabeau first. Even if you die at the hand of the bishop, if she's given a choice between a life half spent as a bird or death, there's every chance she's going to choose life. Navarre rides up to the cathedral and challenges the guards to let him pass. In deference to their former captain, they get out of his way. Philippe unlocks the door, and Navarre, armed with a new sword, gallops inside and heads right for the bishop. Captain Marquet, who kind of dropped out of the film for most of the second act, challenges Navarre to a fight, and they hack at each other with swords. Philippe, as it turns out, did not lose Navarre's sword, but instead stashed it beneath Imperius's cart. He passes Navarre the sword mid-battle, and Navarre defeats Marquet. Believing Navarre has failed in his mission to kill the bishop, Imperius tries to kill Isabeau in her hawk form but can't bring himself to do it. As Navarre prepares to kill the bishop, Isabeau walks into the cathedral in her human form. The eclipse has begun, and as it's now both night and day at once, Isabeau and Navarre are both human. In a burst of fury, the bishop tries to kill Isabeau, and Navarre impales him. The curse is broken. While everyone attending mass stands around and gapes in horror at the guy who just slaughtered their bishop right in front of them, Isabeau and Navarre embrace, and Philippe and Imperius join them in celebration. I hadn't seen Ladyhawke in decades when I decided to revisit it here. it holds up well. Its worst sin is that it's a little sluggishly paced, especially in the middle. There aren't very many characters, and 2 out of the 3 leads, Michelle Pfeiffer and Rutger Hauer, share no scenes together until the very end. This means the bulk of the film consists of scenes of Philippe with Navarre, alternating with scenes of Philippe with Isabeau, with Philippe serving as the intermediary between the star-crossed lovers. This gets repetitive. For the second half of the film, most of the conflict comes in the form of Navarre getting in the way of his own chance at happiness by refusing to even try to break the curse. While it's a foregone conclusion that Navarre will ultimately get his act together, it's still frustrating to watch him directly causing his own problems. Apart from that, though, the film's pretty solid. Ladyhawke has a cool premise. I'm not sure why more romances haven't riffed on this idea of lovers separated by a curse that physically prevents them from seeing each other, because that's pretty clever. The cast is great. Above and beyond being phenomenally lovely, Michelle Pfeiffer brings a grave elegance to Isabeau. Rutger Hauer is brooding and conflicting as the noble jerk Navarre. Apparently Kurt Russell was originally cast as Navarre, and Rutger Hauer stepped in after Russell dropped out right before filming began. Similarly, both Sean Penn and Dustin Hoffman turned down the role of Philippe before it was offered to Matthew Broderick, which strikes me as very strange that these 3 very dissimilar actors would be in contention for the same role. Penn and Hoffman are both powerhouse actors, but the film would have been very different with either of them playing the elfin and agile Philippe. Broderick's performance is an odd one, because between his constant stream of quips and one-liners and the way he carries on a constant conversation with God by speaking directly to the camera, he's essentially playing a medieval French Ferris Bueller. Philippe seems pretty contemporary, which is a little jarring because the rest of the film, while not being especially committed to authenticity, does at least seem plausibly medieval, or at least it reflects the version of medieval life we've come to expect from Hollywood films. Even so, Broderick is largely successful as Philippe, perhaps more so than either Penn or Hoffman would have been. Broderick has always been a very likable actor with a great deal of sympathetic charm, and that helps us root for Philippe, the plucky underdog. On the spectrum of mid-80s fantasy films geared towards Gen Xers, Ladyhawke slips through the cracks. While it was well reviewed upon release and performed respectably at the box office, it's not widely remembered these days. Labyrinth is the one with David Bowie and Muppets. Legend is the one with Tim Curry camping it up as the devil, and is also the one where Tom Cruise somehow forgets to wear pants for the entire film. Neverending Story is the one that traumatized kids with the absolutely horrifying death of Artax. Willow is the one that made us all wonder about George Lucas's taste level. Ladyhawke doesn't have the kind of hooky gimmick that makes it stick in the mind. It features a rock-solid cast of respectable actors, all of whom were established at the time but weren't yet big audience-attracting stars. And it featured a solid story with a clever central conceit that nonetheless didn't stick in the mind as much as, say, David Bowie singing and dancing with Muppets. Through no fault of its own, Ladyhawke gets lost in the mix of mid-80s fantasy films, despite being well-made and enjoyable. Next time, we are headed for a research base in Antarctica, where things will go terribly wrong with John Carpenter's sci-fi horror classic, The Thing. Thank you very much for joining me here today, and I will meet you here later.